There we go. So I have this image here because it looks like some complexity, right? And I feel like it really represents what we're dealing with here. We have what we're dealing with is where science, law, and policy are intersecting, and some would say intersecting. Sometimes they're really colliding, right? And we're trying to get through there. And I bring up this quote from Steve Jobs that I really like, and I think it's appropriate for this conference. Simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple, but it's worth it in the end because once you get there, you can move mountains. And we're going to have to think really hard as we go forward in tackling the problems we're trying to address. So we start, and for some, they may mistake that for the 4th of July show here in Silverton, but that's actually a volcano, and that's how we got started here. We have these fractures and faults, and we have this complex system. And, some people think that that's, a waste pile or mining waste, but that's just a natural, that just happened naturally. That's our Red Mountain. And so we start as here in the Animas River at the headwaters here, and we start, and the river goes down through the alpine tundra, the subalpine forest, the montane shrubland, pinyon, the semi-desert shrubland and riparian land, and that's from here to Farmington. That's 100 miles. It's a really amazing watershed that we're sitting in right now. But we also have a jurisdictional landscape. We're governed by the Army Corps, the U.S. Forest Service, Department of Interior, Environmental Protection Agency, Fish and Wildlife. States and tribes have their own agencies, which are a layer in this jurisdiction with the environmental, mining and safety, health, fish, and wildlife, and then there's local. So you understand all the different layers of different rules associated with the watershed and the property in the watershed. So we're going to look at a snapshot of the BPMD, then we'll go to anatomy of a mining site. We'll talk about the 10th Circuit Chevron decision, and then the White House's reform plan and reorganization recommendations for abandoned mines that just came out earlier this year. The Gold King mine litigation, just where it is right now, what the court is struggling with. We can't go over the whole thing. There's over, I think, 300 filings now, and it's really complex. And then there's questions to consider. So this is our Bonita Peak Mining District. These are the sites scattered through here. You'll notice that, as you can see, they're dots, and they have names associated with them. They're not actual areas that are defined. There's not four corners or a circle, or we don't know where they begin and where they end necessarily. We do know that the Yukon Tunnel is a tunnel and that it's that, but where does it end in regards to the property around that area? And how did this start? That's Baker's Park. Go west, and the people came, Paul mentioned, and mining began. So let's look at a claim. A claim is established, or a site, how a site might be established. A claim is established in 1876, first claim owner. There's an unpatented claim put on there and marked, okay? Fast forward to 1882, another claim is established. This one becomes patent. This is claim 2, owner 2. A tunnel is started, and then it starts to drain into the river. 1904, claim 3, owner 3, 6 additional claims are established in the area. So now we have a waste rock pile in the stream from the draining adit, and we have a mishmash of claims. So who is responsible for that contaminated waste stream? So to give you an idea of how real this is the Red Mountain Mining District in Uray County. I just thought I'd bring our neighbors in while we're here. And these are the claims. And you can see there's the streams coming through here. There's a railroad. These claims overlap. There's areas in between those claims. Those areas in between, those little triangles, often they are actually, those are still public lands in between there. So I call the BMP Superfund, I call the Superfund here the anomaly, okay? On the side, I have called it the Starship Silverton. Kind of like the Starship Enterprise. We're going to go where no one has gone before. And why? Because we have the Gold King spill and intersected with the Bonita Peak Mining District and the Superfund, and then we have the Chevron decision. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. I won't get too bogged down in the legalese, but I think it's important for you to understand what's at play on the periphery while we're trying to figure out these solutions in the science. So the challenge, we've talked about challenges. Well, at this time, we have the Gold King incident has state law claims in New Mexico, there's federal tort claims, and there's Superfund claims. Then there's the Bonita Peak CERCLA litigation. There is none yet. There's an anticipation there could be some, okay? There may not be. We all hope there's not. And then there's the Superfund AOC process, and then there's the natural resource damages process. So this is the legal landscape that we're working under right now, either happening or not. And these are all part of everybody's rights. We have a right to use the system, right? I'm not criticizing anybody, but that's where we are. And so CERCLA, when we talk about CERCLA, the L is for liability, and the legal equals financial, or is the equivalent of legal. The question we always have is if there's nobody there to pay or has the source of funds, how are we going to impose liability and pay for what we're doing? But CERCLA casts a wide liability net and allows plaintiffs to recover cleanup costs from potential responsible parties, PRPs, so as to ensure the hazardous waste cleanup. PRPs include owners, the owners of the property, okay? And so in 2018, a claim can often have more than 24 owners in the chain of title. And some claims have had over 100 owners, okay? And sometimes even you have a surface right owner or a series of surface right owners, dozens, and then you have owners that below the mineral rights are a different set of owners. So I'm going to go to a decision that was made in a court, in a district court in Denver, federal district court in 2001. And in United States versus Freeland, the government, the court found that the government did not qualify as an owner for CERCLA purposes when it merely held fair legal title. So there had to be an indication of ownership beyond just holding the title, they said. So this applies to the Forest Service and the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, and so in 2017, in July of 2017 last year, the Court of Appeals in the 10th Circuit took this up for consideration. It had been debated for the last 2 decades in various realms. And I'm going to tell you why this is important, because more than 85% of San Juan County is owned by the U.S. Department of Interior, which is the Bureau of Land Management, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is the Forest Service. And so from 2001 until July 19th of 2017, the agencies, the owners of the estate, if you will, have been under the impression that they weren't liable. And now the Court of Appeals in Denver decides that an owner covers fee title holders, and that recognizing CERCLA's broad definition of a facility, noting it reaches any site or area of land, and that fee title of unpatented lands belong to the U.S. And in some, the U.S. is a potential responsible party. If you read it closer, those little triangles in between would also be part of the estate, okay? And the liability would go to the federal government. So the U.S. owns those unpatented claims and the areas between the private claims. So how does this impact where we are right here today? If you just go north of town, up the Animas corridor here, on your left-hand side, you have the Mayflower Mill, and you have the tailings ponds. Those tailings ponds were built over decades, right? I don't know, Scott, when did those ponds start? Late 1920s. And so this is a aerial view, right? But you can see them as you go up the Animas. They're just off to your left. You can't miss it, I promise, okay? And so it wasn't until, when was it, Willie, that they actually went from unpatented to patent? You remember? It's been in the last decade. Is that right? Okay, so tailings pond number 4 just went. So that just gives you an idea of how complex this can be. And it impacts something that is close to town, is just a half mile up the road. I'm going to switch gears, go to delivering government solutions in the 21st century. The other thing that's happened recently is that the White House released this report, and part of inside this report, it talked about consolidation of environmental cleanup programs, and talked about the proposal to consolidate Department of the Interior, that's the BLM lands that we were talking about, I mentioned, and then the USDA, that's Forest Service, and have the EPA address environmental cleanup under the comprehensive, under CERCLA and Superfund on federal land, regardless of which other agencies manage the land. And why this may be a great idea, it may work well, but the question becomes for everybody, until we know what that looks like, what are we supposed to do in the meantime? Does that make sense? We don't know really if this is going to happen, what it looks like, and when it's going to transpire, and what the boundaries of that's going to be. So it does create another level of uncertainty from a legal perspective of what's going on and who people should be talking to and how they should be engaging. So I'm going to go to the Gold King mine spill. There's New Mexico versus EPA et al., the Navajo Nation, and then there's class action, and also Utah, excuse me. So this is two states, the Navajo Nation, and two different private parties in this case. The main thing that's going on right now, I say the main thing, the main issue that this court is trying to address right now is is related to the boundaries. And in regards to that, the way that's been described is that the scope of the listing and the future potential remedy is as broad as the watershed, okay? And New Mexico's argument that it can maintain its Clean Water Act claim as to unnamed mines not subject to the NPL listing thus fails. Now, this is the argument by the EPA. Simply put, there are no such mines within the relevant watershed. So the question, and this is inside court, this is not people on the ground here necessarily. This isn't stopping them from doing what they're doing, but this boundary issue is, where does the Bonita Peak Mining District end? It starts here in Silverton, and they're sampling all the way to Lake Powell. And when you look closer, the Bonita Peak site describes the site as being centered within the headwaters of the Animas watershed in the San Juan and Silverton calderas in southwestern Colorado, and potentially extending to wherever the contamination from these sources comes to be located. Contamination from the Gold King mine release has come to be located in Lake Powell. That's from 2017, and so that's the Gold King case right now. What's being discussed and considered. Bonita Peak Mining District National Priority List. There's currently AOC with Sunnyside Mining on the tailings pond adjacent to the town of Silverton, and AOCs are in negotiation status with a few landowners. I think that's a little further now, but I'm not positive on AOCs. And then there's potential federal district court litigation and natural resources damages, potential liability coming as well. And the questions to consider with all this, there are many questions to consider all this. I'm sure way more. I have many more than this. We don't have all day, right? But will the U.S. liability impact CERCLA decision-making process? Talking about the Forest Service and the BLM. And if remediation activities extend to Lake Powell, how will the resources available for cleanup in the Upper Animas watershed be impacted? Finally, if the site extends to Lake Powell, how will the downstream communities and landowners adjacent to the Animas and San Juan rivers be impacted? These are interesting questions that are being discussed, that have been discussed between various entities as well as individual landowners up and down the river. And this gives you one flavor of what we're dealing with when we talk about liability. It's very narrowed down to who owns this property and this issue. But if we go to Lake Powell, it becomes a large estate for many, many people. So that's it. We'll have a panel discussion later. Please